Hey, welcome to today's Subbrief. I'm Aaron. We have just a couple quick things to get through. First, let's revisit the USS Bataan's transit of the Strait of Hormuz. The FARS news agency had released some video shot by the IRGCN as they paraded their canoe club alongside of our warships as we transited that. They tried to edit the video in a way that made it look like Iran told the Americans to land your helicopters and get out of the Strait of Hormuz. And so it was just ended up being a piece of propaganda that was very low quality and poorly edited. And if we let this play too long, you'll start seeing some of the problems with it. But just know that Iran took the opportunity to turn our transit into a propaganda piece. You may have seen it on the internet. It's complete bunk. All we did was move into the Persian Gulf, as we talked about on Monday. All right, let's move over to Bali because something significant did happen there during a routine port visit. The USS Howard, which is an Arleigh Burke class cruiser, experienced a soft grounding. That's where the ship hits the ground under the water but doesn't damage it and can free itself without assistance and then continue on its mission because of the lack of damage. But anytime you get a grounding, it's going to be the fault of the captain because of he's in charge and responsible for the security and safety and operations of the ship. And sure enough, this captain, his first name's Kenji, I can't pronounce his last name, was relieved of duty and is now part of the admiral's staff, which I'm sure is very uncomfortable because he was working, as a captain of the ship under the admiral, and now he has to be on his staff. But that's normally how these things go. Whenever you get relieved and there's a temporary CO on the USS Howard right now, you go to the admiral's staff temporarily before you get reassigned to another command, or maybe he retires. Who knows where he's going to go. But that's what happened near Bali. USS Howard had a soft grounding. The result was the captain was let go or fired, replaced. Let's move up to the South China Sea. This is the main story for today. So we're going to talk about the Philippines outpost on the Second Thomas Shoal because we had a little drama here last week. These are pictures from the Philippine Coast Guard where the Chinese Coast Guard is once again blocking resupply of the handful of Marines, only like 5 or 6, on this little outpost, on this little shoal that is underwater at high tide and has a little sandbar at low tide. And sure enough, the Chinese Coast Guard is always trying to disrupt shipments to these Marines because they don't want them there. So this is what it looks like. This is the Philippine ship, BRP, Sierra Madre, and you can see there it intentionally being grounded. This is it being set in place. And you can see, here at high tide, there's it's all water, right? And this is what she looks like in 2014, so almost 10 years ago. She's just continuing to degrade because of the elements. They're not preserving her in any way. It's simply a structure for a handful of Marines to be there. And here's a picture of what the Marines look like. This is from 2017, where they're just occupying the shoal in the name of the Philippines. So where is this place at? Let's take a look at this wonderful map. This great graphic, we're showing the Philippine claims. I have an arrow going right to the Second Thomas Shoal, the one that we're talking about today. But as you can see, China has successfully occupied most of the South China Sea with its fishing fleet that is then protected by its rather large Chinese Coast Guard. Chinese Coast Guard has a lot of ships, and they're all out there protecting these fisheries that China's taken advantage of. So the Center for Strategic Budget Assessment has released a report today to recommend that we increase our UAV presence overhead in an operation they call Deterrence by Detection. And I want to give credit to the authors here. Center for Strategic Budget Assessment authors Travis Sharp, Thomas G. Mankin, and Tim Sadoff. I hope I'm saying your names right, gentlemen. This is a fantastic report, very comprehensive, talking about what we can do to document this illegal activity that China's doing. So the first thing they did was break down the South China Sea into areas of importance. Like if we had only one flight, where would we want it to go first and where would we get the most value out of it? And that's what this color-coded grid map is. And as you can see, they highlight a lot of the areas that we're talking about today around the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands, Scarborough Shoal up there in the top right as well. Those are the areas where we're going to get the most bang for our buck with our UAVs. They propose a plan. Let's use both Guam and the Philippines to host the flights, to start the flights, and then go over the South China Sea. If we use Guam, we're going to have 80-hour flights because it's a very long transit just to get to the South China Sea and then begin collecting data. Whereas if we use the Philippines, we're right there. As soon as you get up in the air, you can start your mission. So it is much more efficient, and they actually break it down by value here to take advantage of the geographical location of the Philippine Islands and launch our assets out of that, we could use a lot less flights. In other words, if we just use Guam and none of the Philippines, we would need like 30 of these UAV systems. Whereas if we use the Philippines, we could get away with only using 14. There's a huge savings there, using a little bit less than half to get the same or nearly the same amount of data. These types of reports are what Congress needs, this data, so they can justify going forward and telling the Pentagon, do this. So this is where programs like this begin, from a think tank full of very smart people that break these things down by value. And this is where the justification comes from. So this is probably going to happen, folks, if it's not already happening. This is a great kind of overview map of where Guam is, and you can see the long flight that it would take just to get to the South China Sea. That's why these flights out of Guam would be 80 hours, not 40 hours. So you can get 2 flights from the Philippines in the same time it takes to get 1 flight out of Guam. So huge bonus if we just use the Philippine Islands. But they do propose actions where we use both, a couple out of Guam, a couple out of the Philippines, because we probably already have these assets in place in Guam. I'm not sure if we have them in the Philippines, but I bet you it's coming based on this report. All right, so a little bit of history lesson here. Why in the world is this conflict taking place between Coast Guards? Like, what's going on here? And there's something called the 9-dash line that we've talked about in the past. We're going to rehash it just briefly here. The 9-dash line is the area of the South China Sea that China says that it has the rights to harvest resources like fishing and other things that might be below the sea. And surrounding countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Borneo, a handful of others, dispute parts of the South China Sea that are near their shorelines. There's some overlap there. And that's where this conflict is coming into place. And it's just a Coast Guard conflict at this point. But a lot of illegal fishing is happening. And because it's not being recorded and then presented to the public, China's been getting away with this for years. And of course, China accuses the other countries of doing the same thing. So we're finally going to get some eyes in the sky and figure out what's really going on here. That's the whole point of this. But let's talk about the Law of the Sea Convention. This whole 9-dash line really needs to be debunked again. We do this a couple times a year. So if you've seen this before, my apologies, but let's go over it one more time, folks, just for the Chinese Wu-Maos out there that are going to flood the chat with negative comments now that I'm bringing this up, because this is reality that we live in here. It's not the 15th century anymore. It's not the Ming Dynasty, China going to sea in their large junks and dominating that area of the ocean. No, it's 600 years later. They haven't done it for 600 years. That's why they were ruled that they don't have the claim inside the 9-dash line as they suppose. So what is the legal authority for law on the sea? Well, it's called the United Nations Convention of Law on the Sea, UNCLOS. And you can see the signatures, the people that ratified that, promised to obey these laws, include China and the Philippines. But China signed this August 25th of 2006. They said, we agree to these laws. We're going to abide by this law, this jurisdiction, if you will. And whenever the Philippines had a conflict with them in 2013, they went to the UN and said, hey, we want a resolution. So what the UNCLOS did was they used Article 287, Annex 7, saying that you're going to use the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is separate from the United Nations, but it falls under this annex. This court specifically is authorized to resolve or arbitrate disputes. And that's where they went in 2013. Philippines took China to court, essentially, arbitration court, in 2013. And in 2016, they had a ruling that we'll talk about in a second. But the Permanent Court of Arbitration is also ratified, or people have agreed to abide by the rulings of here on this map. You have the blue and the green are all the countries that agree to abide by these rulings. That includes China and the Philippines, as you can see here. So both countries have signed on to agree to Convention of Law on the Sea. Both countries have agreed to abide by the rulings of this Permanent Court of Arbitration. Okay, so far, everybody's on the same page until the ruling comes out. So 2013 comes and goes, and it's 2016, years later, they finally get a arbitration ruling. And this is an actual copy of the press release. It's 11 pages that absolutely eviscerates China's claim to anything inside the 9-dash line based on historical claims going back to like the Ming Dynasty. It's absolutely absurd that they have no grounds, and that's essentially what they found, of claiming anything inside the 9-dash line. The ruling is called the Republic of the Philippines versus the People's Republic of China. And You can read this for yourself. I would encourage you to. But after they eviscerate China for 11 pages, they sum it up with this, because China in 2016 has been doing what you're seeing here for years, and the court knows this. So they said, and I quote, in summary, China shall respect the rights and freedoms of the Philippines and comply with the duties under the convention, referring to Convention of Law on the Sea. Well, this is not complying. Look at what they're still doing. And that's why we're doing this. We're going to increase our unmanned aerial vehicles over the South China Sea for the purpose of deterrence by detection. We're going to record each one of these interactions. We're going to record the illegal fishing and resource harvesting that's going on. And we're going to show it to the world. We're going to show it to the United Nations in an effort to stop China from doing this. We're trying to de-escalate China's behavior. And we'll see if this goes. Now, I know a lot of you out there are probably already typing, this is not going to work. They didn't obey the court's ruling in 2016. Why are they going to be shamed into complying with it now? And you're probably right, but we have to take this step before we take the next one.
Of your heartbeat